In Mombasa, Kenya, a few years ago, a group of religious leaders were meeting to talk about issues affecting the community. But there were some mystery guests.
We sat in that meeting from morning without them knowing who we were. So I think they just thought these are other participants.
These mystery guests were about to reveal something very personal.
I am Max. I am a queer woman.
And saying you're queer could be a dangerous thing.
I know of instances that religious leaders have said being queer is satanic, it is sin, you are going to hell.
The atmosphere was tense.
I was very nervous because these are religious leaders that still stay in the communities that we stay in. So my first fear was, assuming one of these religious leaders knows me or gets to meet me in the streets after this and then outs me there, would I be safe? I had decided it's fine, I will face it, yes.
That courageous act, coming out to religious leaders, is something one group in Kenya has been doing now for over 10 years, and it's been having a remarkable effect. It's part of a unique programme that's helping to change even the most extreme opinions.
What we wanted them to understand is that the LGBT persons are not aliens. The LGBT persons are not planning to harm them. So what we actually wanted to achieve was to ensure that there is harmony in the community and there are no attacks on LGBT persons.
People fixing the world.
Welcome to People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service with me, Richard Kenny. This is the programme where we meet the inspiring people who are tackling the world's problems head on. And this week we're looking at the problem of discrimination and hate faced by the LGBT+ community, and how one group has found a way of stopping it. But they aren't marching in the streets. Instead, in carefully controlled meetings, they're talking directly to some of the very people who are spreading hate. Lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people, and anyone of a gender and sexual minority, some prefer the term queer, have often suffered from prejudice.
I came back home and found that my compound had been littered with a lot of pamphlets saying that we do not want homosexuals in this village. We have given you 5 days to vacate, otherwise we will come for your head.
That's Ismail Bahati telling me about one frightening experience he's faced as a gay man in Kenya. It's a country where gay sex is still illegal. You can go to jail for 14 years if you're caught. Ismail lives in Mombasa, a large city on Kenya's east coast. There's an international port here and a big tourist industry. But it's also a conservative place where the voices of Muslim and Christian religious leaders have a huge influence on society. So LGBT life often takes place in the shadows.
So pride can never happen here. If we have to do it, we have to do it in our own privacy, maybe get a hotel, organize ourselves there. But we cannot go to the street and we cannot say that we are gay people and we are going to meet somewhere else. No, our meetings are always secretive and stuff like that.
So not an easy place for the LGBT community. But the situation only a few years ago was a lot worse. In 2010, a BBC World Service assignment documentary reported on how influential Muslim and Christian leaders were stirring up hate mobs. Here they came across a meeting held by a Muslim sheikh, and a word of warning, you may find what you're about to hear offensive.
Takbir! Takbir!
What he's saying, it's high time these gay people should be killed. They should go out there, pick them one by one and slaughter them.
There are two targets nearby for the Sheikh's anti-gay campaign. A local night spot, the California Club, and the Kenyan Medical Research Institute, known as KEMRI.
California, KEMRI yote ichomwe. Leo.
Now he's saying California and Cambridge, they must be burnt today. They must be burnt down today, not tomorrow. Today.
Ishmael was actually interviewed for the documentary, and I asked him what he remembered of those times.
They would go into the houses, they went into places of small businesses that LGBT community were operating, bars that were believed to be LGBT friendly, clinics and hospitals that were deemed to be supportive of LGBTI persons. So it was bad because from that people have been traumatized, people lost their livelihood, and their life has never gone back to the same as it was before the attacks.
Was it a frightening time? It sounds awful.
Yes, it was, because just to give you a scenario, one of our members, they had poured gasoline on him and they were going to burn him alive. Luckily, there was a woman who is very known, and she went and grabbed him and said that, please don't burn him. That's how he escaped, because at that time, the police arrived on time, and that's how he was saved.
Ishmael decided he had to do something. He'd recently set up an LGBT support group called PEMA Kenya. That's Persons Marginalised and Aggrieved in Kenya. And together they worked out a way to tackle the problem.
It was an initiative that came out of need. Ours was basically to dialogue with the faith leaders to ensure that there are no more attacks on LGBT persons along the coastal line. So we invited the sheikh and the imam to organize and invite fellow religious leaders to come and join us, so that we could take them through a sensitization program. And that's how this work began.
So Ishmael's response to the violence was to invite faith leaders to what he calls a sensitization program. That included some of the very people whose words had stirred up so much trouble, and also faith leaders who were less extreme but often had negative views about homosexuality. But how was he going to change those beliefs? And could he even get them to attend a program to discuss LGBT rights? He decided to use a bit of stealth.
We realized that dialoguing with faith leaders using human rights aspect was not effective. It would bring up a backlash. So we thought about coming up with a topic that affects everyone. And what a best topic that would have worked for us those days other than HIV. So we picked up on HIV as an approach, a starting point for us to talk about the larger issue about LGBT persons.
Father Thomas Appeal, a Catholic priest, was one of the first faith leaders to attend.
During that time, there was a very big surge of HIV and AIDS. People were dying. So he said he was asking me if I could be part of the training. I responded affirmatively.
So here's how the program works. A group of around 15 to 20 faith leaders, both Muslim and Christian, are invited to a 5-day training session called Facing Our Fears. They discuss issues around HIV and the discrimination certain groups face because of it. But gradually they begin to focus on one issue.
We go to now how to support people that are being marginalized, and hence LGBT becomes part of it. And now we narrow it down to now discussing about what do they understand about LGBT persons, what are the myths and misconceptions about LGBT that they have had, and we try and correct the misinformation that they have had before.
But the real make or break moment comes on the 4th day when some other people join the group. Eventually they reveal they're from one of those marginalised groups. They could be gay men, lesbian or trans, and they stand up and tell their story. Max told me it was nerve-wracking to take part.
The first thing is you introduce yourself and you say, my name is this, born in this place, I have brothers and sisters, currently I am doing this, and I am also queer. The way I did it is that being queer was not what was going to define me. I had other things that defined me than my sexuality.
And what was the immediate reaction from people in the room?
Most of them were surprised. In fact, some of them just kept quiet for some time. They were just looking at me.
Father Appeal remembered how he felt.
Well, the moment was a little bit tense for the first time, and I was disgusted. I have heard that particular persons are homosexuals, but this was a very interesting moment because people were coming out frankly and without fear in my own judgment, and feeling that they were accommodated in that group.
Ishmael also used to take part in the meetings.
I talked about how An LGBT person is not a person that you would identify by seeing them. A person next to you might be gay, your son might be gay. For example, we have been here for the last 5 days. Do you think I'm straight or gay? And I'll let them guess. Some will say, obviously, you are not gay, And I'll tell them, well, I am part of LGBT.
Something that really gave me a lot of hope and made me not regret for what I did is that there were one Muslim woman and one Catholic sister and one pastor that when I finished my sharing of experience, they actually stood up and hugged me. So I said, okay, even if the three of them have, at least gotten my point. And that was the first time I was coming into contact with a religious leader hugging me, actually. So I said, okay, maybe I'm not as bad as I think I am.
Many of the faith leaders present had never actually met any LGBT people before, so they often had misconceptions. Now, here in front of them was a real person they could talk to, and Max would face some awkward questions.
For example, they would say, if you are a queer woman, it is because you have had bad experience with men, which is not true. They would also think if you're a queer woman, you hate men, which is not also true. They'd still say, queerness was brought by Western countries.
On my part, the misconception that I can say is that to be a homosexual is brought about by devilish behavior.
And that has changed now? And how has that changed?
This has changed because in the beginning, I was only learning in theory about homosexuality. I was also hearing biased ideas from people who hated homosexual. I being one of them, that time I didn't like to mingle with homosexual. So as the time went on, we had a lot of openings, people coming out, explaining their position, helped me to change my perspective altogether.
One of the trainers is Louis, and he thinks there's one important ingredient for breaking down barriers.
The key thing that I think makes all the magic is creating a space where one can talk. Sometimes it eliminates all the ignorance that there is and creates that aha moment where, okay, I didn't know this, but it's good you've mentioned it. I'll reflect on it and get back to you. Talking is the magic that seals everything.
So what sort of effect has this training had? Well, Pema Kenya commissioned an independent survey of religious leaders who'd taken part, and over 3/4 of them said they'd changed their views from hating and demonising to understanding, acceptance, and in some cases even embracing the LGBT community. But I wondered about the others. How did they react when suddenly faced with people they might have denounced as evil? Here's Ishmael.
In some cases, we have been accused of corrupting religion. We have had people walk out, faith leaders that we have invited, sometimes leave when we get to talk about LGBT issues.
How do you deal with that? What do you do to when somebody is so opposed to you like that they walk out?
So what we do is basically to give another chance, reach out to other faith leaders to talk to them and make them understand what we were trying to do. We do not turn out anyone that ever said bad things about us. For example, in our spaces, we've had people that got offended first 5 years back coming later on and becoming our allies. So it takes a lot of patience.
In the 10 years or so since it's been going, nearly 800 faith leaders have been through the training. But a really clever part of the plan is what happens next. Around 100 of those faith leaders have carried on the work and become allies who work on behalf of the LGBT community, often despite strong opposition from within their own institutions.
Faith leaders are the best allies that you can ever have. The moment you make a breakthrough with faith leaders, you are likely to make a breakthrough with many other stakeholders that might have harmed the LGBT community.
Father Appeal became one of the first allies. From being someone who was disgusted by homosexuality, he had a complete change of heart and now works closely with the LGBT community. And he's been able to talk to those more hardline preachers who had stirred up trouble, people who wouldn't talk to Pema themselves.
I hope to make them believe that every human being has a right to live, to have a good shelter, to be respected. They need to know more about sexuality from the spiritual perspective and emotional perspective.
Faith leaders have an influential voice in all levels of society, and this makes the allies incredibly useful. If a priest or an imam says don't discriminate, people in Mombasa will listen. So allies have talked to the media about how LGBT issues are portrayed, and they've spoken to groups such as politicians, the police and the judiciary to make sure LGBT people are treated fairly.
So, for example, a service provider will tell you that I cannot offer you these services because my faith does not allow me to support the LGBT persons. So we're bringing in a faith leader who will take them through, understanding that faith does not give you a ground to discriminate or stigmatize against any person.
Father Appeal is a hospital chaplain and does a lot of work with the staff there to make sure people get the treatment they need.
If, for example, I have an infectious disease and you don't treat me, you are not only harming me, you are harming my family, you are harming my community. So by telling them that they have to do their work, their responsibility, after all, they are paid not to judge, they are paid to treat, to heal.
Some faith leaders have directly intervened to stop violence. One of them, Ibrahim, a Muslim ally, came to the aid of a group of gay men.
Personally, I have saved about 2 to 3 characters who were about to be attacked. Some youth that are trying to go and strike where this community are living. I informed the area chief. The area chief, they have been trained on the issue of the LGBTQ. So they were very fast also to respond. They were evacuated from the area and taken to a safe place.
And Ibrahim has a message for religious people who spread hate against the LGBT community.
The very, very characters, we are trying to demonize them. In the whole Quran, we are not supposed. The only job for us is to go with them, talk to them, and at least accommodate them as they are. Because the only person who can either discipline or do anything about a human being is only the Almighty God.
A group of Pema members and their allies celebrating together. The initiative has helped many LGBT people with their own faith. In the past, churches or mosques in the region might have shunned them. Now they're hearing more positive messages, and there are safe places for them to worship. And the streets seem safer too. The mob attacks we reported on 10 years ago no longer happen. In a poll of Pema's LGBT plus members, about 2/3 said they'd experienced a reduction in hate speech and violence stirred up by religious leaders. Pema's wider research suggests this is because of the training program.
Life has changed for LGBT persons. We are invited in churches, we are invited in Islamic forums. We have also seen religious leaders talk about inclusion of everyone in faith spaces regardless of their sexual orientation. This is already a milestone for us.
So why does this training program seem to work? Well, many psychologists believe that contact between opposing groups under certain conditions can reduce prejudice. It's called contact theory, and without knowing it, that's what Pema have been putting into practice.
When we refer to contact theory or talk about intergroup contact, we're basically talking about cases where members of different groups come together to engage in meaningful interactions with each other.
Linda Trop is a professor of social psychology at the University of Massachusetts.
When you get members of different groups together, especially when they're getting to know each other for the first time, it's often helpful to give them an opportunity to talk about things that don't relate to group membership, getting to know each other as individuals, learning more about their beliefs, their attitudes, their interests, so that they can develop a sense of rapport and a sense of trust.
And that's what Ishmael and his team do when they carefully introduce LGBT people to religious leaders.
I do think it is a good example of contact theory in practice, in part because at its most basic level, contact is humanizing. We can think about all of the stereotypes and negative associations that we have with different groups, but then when we actually get to know members of other groups and engage with them, talk with them, interact with them, they become more complex beings in our minds. They become essentially more fully human. That is what I believe can truly lead to broader changes in attitudes and potentially also our own behaviors in working to promote greater equality and acceptance for those groups as well.
Well, around the world, the situation for LGBT people is mixed, to say the least. 69 countries have laws that criminalise homosexuality, and nearly half of those are in Africa. In recent years, anti-gay violence and persecution has continued in Ghana and Uganda, and an attempt to overturn Kenya's ban on gay sex was rejected in 2019. But what's happened in Mombasa is a good news story for LGBT rights. So is it a sign of hope?
LGBTQ plus people on this continent are fierce. They are not holding back. The genie's out of the bottle.
Lorna Diaz is from the Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Kenya.
Countries have been overturning archaic laws left, right and centre. Shortly after Kenya did not do the right thing, it was Botswana that came up with an excellent ruling. But then again, look there, you'll see opposition. And so inasmuch as there are horror stories in various countries, there are beautiful stories as well. And ever since Pema Kenya has been doing the work that it's been doing, we see far less instances of insecurity during religious periods than we did before. And for me, that is incredibly motivating and inspiring.
Ishmael started training faith leaders outside Mombasa in other parts of Kenya. And he believes that this sort of work can bring about a positive change across Africa.
Faith leaders influence how laws are made, and we are hoping that we can also have faith leaders that want to support decriminalization, not just in Kenya, but in other parts of the world. For example, what's happening in Ghana, what is happening in Uganda, those are scenarios that we would not expect to see after this work is successful to a larger level.
And let's leave the final word to Max, one of those brave people that have been changing attitudes in Mombasa.
It is very important to me. For me, personally, I believe if only one queer person is not safe, I am not safe, and all of us are not safe. So for me, because I had the platform and in a position to share my story and my experience as a queer woman, I said I'll do it on behalf of my community.
So that's it for this week's People Fixing the World. We love hearing from you, so let us know what you thought of the programme, or maybe you've spotted some great solutions you think we should look at. Get in touch. Our email is peoplefixingtheworld@bbc.co.uk. But for now, thanks for listening.
I honestly started to believe I was going to be one of those athletes that's just going to be second or third best or fourth best, never meant for Paralympic gold.
A podcast about athletes who've stood on the Olympic and Paralympic podium.
Getting out of the hospital, I did not have any energy. I was just devastated, broken. I could not do a thing.
And the stories that got them there.
The quickest way to get me to do something is to tell me I can't do it.
On the Podium, from the BBC World Service.
Olympic medal is very big deal in India.
When you arrive at the airport, the whole nation is there.
Everyone was out in the streets, and I'm talking like everybody.
Search for On the Podium, wherever you get your podcasts.